Hey everybody, Gil here with the Sailing Vessel Dream Chaser, and in this week's episode we've got a couple of topics for you. Some of you may remember we started to repair our decks on the boat. We pulled up the teak decks, we found some places with core rot, we actually cut the top layer of fiberglass skin off, replaced the core with hardwood core, and at the time I just reskinned it with a single layer of glass, knowing I'd be coming back to it. As a matter of fact, if you're interested in that, right up here, I'll go ahead and put the one of those informational cards will pop down, and you can see the series there. But in this week's episode, we're going to jump into that. I've added additional layers to that to thicken up the fiberglass, show you how we went about that. This week also, where we're located, we had a predicted direct hit from Hurricane Nate, so we'll talk a little bit about how we prepared for a hurricane, and then ultimately what the outcome was. So we'll go over that. And I'll probably give just a small amount of some sad news. Unfortunately, we had another funeral in the family. It's been a tough time here with family members, and man, it's sad, and it's also awesome to honor and respect those that have passed. But I could do without another funeral for a little while. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Fiberglass deck and Hurricane Nate preparation. Thanks everybody, and listen, if you like this, go ahead and click on the subscribe button, I think down here. And please do give it a thumbs up. Thanks all. Hope you enjoyed the video this week. So I'm not sure how well you can see this, but right behind me is actually the place on the deck where I had replaced the core in the past. And all that you see over the top of that, the brown patch, is essentially one single layer of chop strand mat. If you watch the videos that I referenced earlier from previous videos, I actually replaced this with mahogany hardwood as a new core. You probably also saw a few hands kind of go into the screen right there on the side. That's my boat neighbor Keith and friend that really helped during this project, and it kind of surprised me. It's a simple task. If you can have somebody help you mix epoxy or fiberglass, the job is so much easier to do. So thank you to Keith for doing that. It really helped a ton. But like any project, you first want to start really cleaning this all down with acetone. We want to get all the oil and grease off the deck, and the whole thing has to be wiped down well. I'm missing a bunch of footage, and I think I might know what happened. I had my camera out, two 64 gig cards in it. It's set to automatically go from one card to the next if it runs out of footage. I knew I was going to have epoxy on my hands, didn't want to touch the camera, so I set everything up, hit start, and kind of went and made sure everything was good. Halfway through or so, I ended up running out of some epoxy. I got a little footage of that. I'll go through that in a minute. But I suspect at some point early in that process, I don't know why, the camera went off. So I'm missing a lot of footage. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut into the next scene. You're going to see that I'm working on some fiberglass. I'll explain the process here. It'll all make sense because it's the same on all of the different sections I've done. But just to sort of bring you up to speed in what you are not seeing in this little piece of missed footage is after wiping the whole deck down, I went ahead and laid down a piece of chop strand mat, and this is dry. I didn't have anything down on the deck. And then I tore the chop strand mat. It's important. I didn't use scissors because it gives it a rigid or hard edge. I tore it, and all those little fingers and fibers get loose, and it helps blend in really well and pack down. So I cut that first piece, or tore that first piece, to fit right inside the opening. I then repeated the process with two additional layers of woven roving. Woven, I get these backwards all the time, you know what I mean. So I did the first one about the same size of the opening, and then I did the next one about an inch wider on all sides, and then I did another piece of chop strand mat and tore that about 3 inches wider on all sides, so it would completely cover the entire new section of deck, as well as where the new core was and the existing deck. I had beveled this, I grounded at an angle here like this, so that the woven that's overlapping this, and then that last piece of chop strand goes all the way over it. The idea is you're really meshing the deck together into one solid piece again. So what you're about to see is I've already put down the first layer of chop strand, the 2 layers of woven, and half of the top of the chop strand mat top layer, and I'm now just putting the last layer on. But I can show you the entire process of that, and like I said, it's the same on all layers. So sorry for the missed footage, no fast motion going through it here, but this will all make sense as you see the next parts. Thanks. All right, well this morning the project is going to be to add a few more layers of epoxy and fiberglass mat down onto the deck where we replaced that core. It's been sitting like this for months, I just haven't gotten around to doing it, and now's the day. Of course, as soon as I do that, I realize I don't have enough epoxy, so I'm gonna have to run to the store, grab some epoxy, and then I'll come back and cut my cloth and we'll get ready to put those layers down. On the rest of the deck, I intend to use polyester resin. However, with this section, I already did epoxy for the first layer, and you can't really put polyester resin on top of epoxy for as strong of a mechanical bond between the two different chemicals. So I'm going to finish this one out with thickness with epoxy, and I'll just have one small section of the deck that has epoxy. The rest of it's all going to be fiberglass. Probably not the best solution, but I decided to do this instead of rip all that core out, especially since I used thickened epoxy to adhere the new core down to the lower skin, and then I put layers of epoxy and fiberglass mat on top of the core. So it would be quite a challenge to pull all that out. I just figure it's going to be okay to do this. Once it's painted, no one's going to see the difference in the surface, and some might argue that I might have a small section where the two different materials join and overlap that maybe isn't quite as strong as the rest of it. And I think by the numbers, that's a true statement. I also don't think that it's going to make a difference, right? It's that kind of, if I need a strength of 5 and I'm arguing about a strength of 8 or 10, what's really the difference? So that's kind of where I'm at. All right, here's the spot the camera comes back online. But you can see the section of deck here. I've got that woven down. I have the piece of mat. I'll put an arrow right here to point to it, but this is the spot where I have not soaked it yet. I just have the mat sitting down. So by this point, I have enough epoxy all over the deck. I'm trying to avoid epoxying my knees down to the deck. But I've mixed the epoxy really well, and I tend to do this in small batches. What I've found is if I try to do too much at one time, oftentimes it starts to harden or gets harder to work. So instead, I'm going to be doing this in small batches. You just saw me pick up a roller. The roller I'm using is a 7-inch wide epoxy roller. Corona makes one, Corona with a K. It's called the Glass Coater. My local store didn't have one of those, so this is an equivalent to that. But I take the epoxy and I essentially just pour it right down onto the mat, and then I'm using my Glass Coater roller here, and as I'm rolling it around, what I'm really trying to do is completely saturate the mat. You'll start to see as I do this, it changes from white to translucent. And when it actually goes clear like that, you know that you've completely soaked the material. And I'm just going to repeat this process until I get it thoroughly soaked. One thing you don't want to do is skimp on the resin. The rule of thumb is the amount of the amount of fiberglass mat by weight is about the same amount you ought to be using by weight of epoxy. So if I have a 20-ounce mat, 1 foot by 1 foot, and I'm putting 20 ounces of that down, I should put down 20 ounces by weight of my resin as well. Same whether it's polyester resin or epoxy resin. I didn't weigh everything out by volume here. I really just get it completely saturated, and then once I had the material saturated, I then roll out and remove the air bubbles, which I'll show in just a second. So I'm now mixing up the last of my batch of epoxy resin, and I'm pouring it down on the deck, and I'm again using the Glass Coater to smooth this out. What I don't have footage of right here, but it's worth showing, is using a fin roller. I use a fin roller that's about 5 inches wide, and a fin roller is really just it looks kind of like a paint roller, except it's only about as big around as maybe your thumb, as opposed to 1.5 inches or so like a regular roller is. And the fin roller is metal with grooves in it, fins, that's the name. And what you do with this is you slowly roll it from the center outward on the material, and it further pushes the glass down into the resin, and it removes any air bubbles or unevenness in the surface itself. It's really important that you go slow with it. If you start running it back and forth, it lifts up a little bit, but if you run it slowly from the center outward, it's a phenomenal way of getting a nice finished product and getting all of your resin fibers down. So I went ahead and did that on every layer as I went. Through the magic of time and lost footage, let's fast forward a few days and I'll show you what the actual deck looks like after the surface is completely hardened and we're walking on it and everything seems to be good there. I will say, I believe I might want to put one more layer down, or maybe 2 before I fair it. It feels like it's just a little bit lower than the rest of the deck, and I'd rather fill it with glass and give it additional structural strength than just put a fairing compound on it, which would make it look great, but it's kind of probably a little thicker than I might want to do with just fairing. So I'll be putting another layer or 2 down. Well, it sure doesn't look like much here, but you know, that's patched, and it has four layers of woven and also a couple layers of cross strand mat down on it, so chop strand mat.
Skillet probably needs one more layer, and then I'll be set to go, and we'll get that all faired in with the rest of the deck. We're good to go. Well, for those of you who don't know, Hurricane Nate was down off the Yucatan Peninsula heading north, and it looked like it was going to kind of be a direct hit over New Orleans.
Plus, we are getting ready for Hurricane Nate.
Where are you standing? Up high?
Yeah, I hate it.
We're only like 12 feet off the water.
That doesn't reassure me at all.
It doesn't?
No.
What is this thing called, you know?
No.
The bow spread.
Oh, it's so high up.
Alright. Oh yeah, it's nice. We're up high. This is where we are. We're standing right out on the edge.
What if the wind comes?
Well, if the wind comes, hold on
I
tight.
Stand there.
Huh?
That's the ultimate fear zone.
Alright. You ready? Anything else you want to say?
I also predict that it will thunder in like an hour.
Okay. If it does, you should not hold on to those metal rails. There you go. Last night we did a little running around, came back to the boat, and it was a good-sized alligator gar, probably maybe 25 to 30 inches long. Dead, but sitting right next to the boat. They are ugly-looking fish. Let's see if the video comes out. I took a shot of it, at least with the camera, but it was dark, so we'll see how well it comes out. Because of that, we wanted to make sure we prepped. We went ahead and pulled all the canvas down off the boat. I actually left the sail covers on, but I wrapped line around them, spiraled it all the way in, and tied it in every foot and a half or so. Tied up around the roller furling rather than pulling the sails off, given it was just category 1. I figured even if it gets to category 2, that's probably going to be okay. We double lined all the dock lines, raised what we call our banger boards up here that lets me float above the dock if the water were to flood. So we did pretty good preparation. We scheduled to hit last night overnight, and lo and behold, there was almost nothing. It hit a little west of us. It hit a little east of us. We were on the west side of it, always the good side to be on. And in the end, we did a lot of preparation and ended up not being necessary. But I guess better well prepared and not need it than ill prepared and wish you had done it. So that's kind of what we had this week with Nate.
And then there's also the sadder part of this video. Some of you may know Deb's mom has recently passed away about 45 days ago or so. She had a long battle with cancer, and Deb was taking care of her. And her Deb's health wasn't great, but the focus was really on her mom. Her dad's health wasn't great, but he was doing better. He was starting to gain some strength, and Deb had been spending a lot of time over there, kind of taking care of him and making sure that he had what he needed. Unfortunately, he also passed away. Really sad to have this happen with both of her parents in just under 2 months. But the service was absolutely beautiful, and as we were going through things, what we found out was we knew Dan had been in the Korean War and in Vietnam. We didn't know quite the level of decorated soldier he was. So finding Purple Hearts and Bronze Stars was really interesting, and I know Deb's brother's going to be doing some things with those and putting them into a nice little memorable wall hanging or shadow box type thing along with a flag. So a couple of pictures I'm showing in the background here, him getting decorated with his medals. We found some old photos and scanned them in. I also have a picture of him out sailing with us. Very fond memory for Deb of her dad sailing on Galveston Bay with us just 5 or 6 years ago. And then the service was really beautiful. There's something very tear-jerking about a military service when the Marine Corps show up and they fold the flag, and there's a 21-gun salute just outside the door. They fold the flag, present it to a gunny sergeant who turned around and presented that flag to Deb's brother, the oldest son next of kin. It was really touching, and there's something about those first 3 bars of taps playing. It sort of gets you deep inside, but it was a lovely service, and it was a great way to pay tribute to a great man and a great American. So I have just a couple of little seconds of this. I don't want to bore you guys with a bunch of it. Just thought you might find it interesting. Thanks.
Safe sailing, folks, from Gil and the rest of the crew on Sailing Vessel Dream Chaser. Have a great one.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching, and please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even Tumblr. Please take a moment and go over to our website at svdreamchaser.com to download free resources for cruising and how-to projects. Get your thumbs and mouses ready. We also have a couple of links right on the screen for some other playlists and videos that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks for watching, fellow dreamers.